Well, hello, everybody. This is Mark Vines, and welcome to the Mark Vines Show. Thank you for joining us today. And once again, we do have a Facebook site, the Mark Vines Show. Please, if you have not done so, visit our website, give us a like, and give us a rating on whatever platform you're listening to us on as well. That'll help us increase our ratings and continue to provide this service to you. And we really do look at this as a service to the community and helping people put into perspective what is going on. So today I want to get everybody outside of the box of their thinking, outside of the box of their head, and kind of look at today's issues, today's problems from a little different viewpoint. And I'm going to ask you to just kind of sit back and just kind of walk with me through something that you're not going to hear anywhere else, and I can guarantee you that. I'm going to be looking at today's problems that we are having with the rioting, the looting, the mayhem that's going on. And I'm going to put it through a different light and maybe suggest a way that we can do some application of thinking to our problems. Because we really do need to put an end to this. This is just ridiculous for our society. It's not helping anyone. It's hurting race relations. We have politicians that are inflaming anger. Yesterday I saw, like all of you, the tweet that Miss Ocasio-Cortez out of New York put out stating that she wants to see the lockdowns occur until after the election in order to maximize the financial difficulties that people are having. And we just cannot have that. It is amazing to me how people are putting their own self-interests before the interests of the nation. And you notice I'm not talking about political parties here. I'm not talking about political parties. I hope to believe that there are people on both sides of the aisle that want this country to succeed and do well. Because, as far as the world is concerned, the United States has to do well. If you've not traveled around the world as an American and seen some of the poverty and seen the suffering that occurs around the world to this day, if you have not done that, you're missing out, because you need to go see what goes on in other countries so you can see how they look up to the United States and they look at us as being a leader. And really, our economy is tied to the world's economy, and when we suffer, the rest of the world suffers. So, folks, let's just put the United States first. Let's put our interests first, and please, let's just be kind to one another. And let's just stop with the destruction that's going on out there. Now, when I say I want you to sit back and really open your mind to some thinking, I want to do a little bit of maybe education here today, and then take that education and apply it to today's world. And this is going to be a lesson that many of you would have thought, what in the world? How did you apply this to that? But let's walk through it. What I want to do is give you a little background. So many of you may not know this, but I do a lot of work with people in recovery. And by that, I mean addiction recovery, helping people in the community overcome alcohol and prescription drug abuse, PTSD, suicidal thoughts, and those kinds of issues. And that type of work has led me to develop a framework for thinking that may have an application to the rest of society. And I've thought about the 12 steps, and if you are not practicing the 12 steps, you've at least heard of those, the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, which is used in every 12-step program that you can imagine. And there's over 600 variations of 12-step programs that are out there worldwide. And the 12 steps can be applied to a life, and I would extrapolate from that even into society. Now, I'm not going to go through an extensive application as to why I think that that's the case, but I'm going to give you kind of an overview. Maybe down the line, I'll do some episodes on the Mark Vines Show discussing in detail how each and every single step applies to wellness for a community and for a person. And in fact, I may even write a book about that. And I've thought about that, writing a book about applying the 12 steps to the community. But we're just going to get sort of a 30,000 view foot today of what I mean by that. Now, just let me back up here a little bit. When you're dealing with drugs and alcohol, there is absolutely a genetic predisposition for people that have addiction. And again, we'll cover that maybe some other time, or when I get my book completed, you can read about it. But just work with me right now and understand that there is a genetic predisposition, meaning that if you have addiction, it runs somewhere else in your family, and you have it. And once you pick up that first drink or that drug, you're going to have a progression that will continue over time, and a couple of things will happen. Either you get sober or you're going to die. That's what's going to happen. Now, how I'm going to parallel addiction to what's going on today is we have issues in our society. We have things that have happened that are genetic, they're endemic to our nation's history. And so the big flavor of this week is this whole aspect of racial tension and slavery and the Civil War and all of the issues that have led us to where we are now. So if you will, just kind of picture in your mind that is the nation's precondition, very similar to the precondition of addiction in an individual. Now, what happens with addiction is you have to stop. You have to cease and desist from your use, meaning if you are truly an alcoholic, and I'm just going to stick with alcohol here for a second because I think that's what most people understand. Many people know somebody that has a drinking problem in their life, and so maybe that's easily relatable. So if you know someone, or if you are someone that is an alcoholic, the only answer to that is to quit drinking altogether. You need to cease drinking. Now, what happens is that once a person stops drinking, then you have to develop a whole lifestyle or a thought process that helps you from beginning drinking. Does that make sense? So AA, in other words, does not get a person sober. AA keeps a person sober. In other words, you go to a detox or you go to treatment to stop drinking, and then you have to develop some sort of a program to not start drinking. Because then what happens is if you pick up that first drink or drug, then you relapse, and then this whole cycle starts over, and then it's progressive, and actually it gets worse over time. It does not get better. Now let's jump over to what's going on into the community today. So it seems like for a period of time, we as a nation have been in recovery, if you will. And again, I want you to keep that analogy, to stretch your mind, the analogy of the problem of slavery, the problem of what happened in this nation during the Civil War back in the 1860s has been relatively dormant. Now, if you don't agree with me, I'm going to ask you this. I'm going to ask you, how many of you over the last 30 some odd years, I'm in my 50s right now, how many of you in your lifetime walked around and looked at, say, a statue of Robert E. Lee or Jeb Stuart, or saw a news report about Fort Hood or any of these other military bases and thought to yourself, hey, we need to change the name of that base, or we need to bring that statue down because it's just inherently racist and something has to be done about it? How many of you have done that? I know I haven't. The Civil War ended 155 years ago, and the Civil Rights Movement occurred in the 1960s, and so that was back to the beginning of my lifetime. And I have spent my entire career in corrections, law enforcement, the Navy, the FBI, a long time. And I really have not walked around just thinking, oh my gosh, look at all the racism, blatant racism that is going on around me. I mean, it's not something that is part of our daily existence. I don't care how much the press tells you that it is. I don't care how much they try to convince you that it is. The reality is, it's really not part of our daily existence. I actually think that the American people are inherently a very good and giving people. Now, does it mean that we don't have pockets of it? Does it mean that we don't have some people that are racist? Does it mean that there aren't issues around here? Absolutely not. Those occur, but those are individuals. That is not the society. That is not the system. That is not the police departments. That's not the Department of Defense. It is individuals. And you have to understand that when you have a nation of about 230 some odd or more million people in a country, you're going to have that. You're going to have that. You have to understand there are stupid people out there. There are bad people out there. There are evil people out there. There are crazy people out there. When I was a police officer, I used to tell my wife all the time, I used to say, honey, If you knew how many people out here are crazy and really have no business walking around unsupervised at any time, it would scare the living hell out of you. It just would. There are people out there that are ignorant, that are stupid, and that are crazy, and they should not be out there. And those are the people that we're dealing with. Just like up in Minneapolis, we saw an example of a guy who should have never been a police officer. But that does not mean that all police officers are bad. It absolutely does not. It means he was a bad police officer. By the way, have you noticed, as of today, which is June 24th, I still have not seen any evidence or statements or witnesses that have said that he did what he did because his victim was black. There's a lot of evidence that suggests that he did it because he's a bad cop, but this guy who has, where there's been no evidence whatsoever presented that he did it for racial motives, we are now burning the country down over racial issues. And it's because I believe the nation has gone into what we call in the recovery world, the nation has gone into a relapse. A relapse. Now, if you know anything about addiction and why people go back to start using drugs or drink, what you're going to find is that it's resentments that cause them to go back to drinking or drugging again. If you know somebody in your life that has had years of sobriety, meaning that they are beginning a program, they're getting well, and their life is getting back together, and if they go back and start drinking or drugging again, it is usually because they have been upset about something and they have developed a resentment. And in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, there's actually a phrase in here that says this, and I'm quoting, "The greatest enemies of us alcoholics are resentment, jealousy, envy, frustration, and fear." Let me read that again. The greatest enemies of us alcoholics are resentment, jealousy, envy, frustration, and fear. That's what causes people to go back and drink and drug after a period of abstinence. And I believe that is what is happening right now. That we have developed that resentment and we have gone back and we have re-examined our past to a degree that's not healthy, that is not normal, it is not good, and it is destructive. Because here's what happens in the 12 steps. And I'm not going to go through, today's not a lesson on the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, but I do think that there's some extrapolations that we can apply here today. Now, for those of you that don't know, the 12 Steps of Alcoholics Anonymous is a spiritual program. It's spiritual development, and it's a way for a person to be able to examine themselves in relation to society, in relation to their family, and really in relation to themselves, and then develop that themselves. And part of that development is really understanding that there is a power greater than themselves, and that power greater than themselves will help them overcome whatever obstacles they have in their life, whatever those things are that causes them to go back and drink and drug. Okay? But part of that is just giving into what is. What is your life? You are who you are. Your sexuality, your color, your status in life, your profession. It is what it is. You are where you are today. And you have this thing, let's just stick with alcohol. Alcohol is overwhelming your life, and it is defeating you, and it is killing you. And you have to understand that you're powerless over that. There's nothing that you can do. That the way to victory over this issue is to actually surrender to it. This is the only war, the only aspect of your life where the way you defeat something is to surrender to that something. And therefore, the very first step of AA is this. I'm powerless over alcohol and my life has become unmanageable. Powerlessness and unmanageability. You and I, living today, are powerless over what has happened in the history of this nation. There is nothing that you and I can do to change it. There is not one living person on planet Earth today that it was alive in the 1860s. Now think about that. Not one person. Now, there was not one person that owned a slave in the United States alive today, and there is not one person that was a slave in the United States alive today. Not one. We are powerless over that. Now, The second part of that is unmanageability. I'm powerless over alcohol. My life has become unmanageable. Now, that unmanageability part is being translated into today. It's become unmanageable because we've allowed it to become unmanageable. And we have to do something about it. Okay? We have to do something about this. Now, again, I'm not even going to begin to go through the 12 steps today, but I'm going to give you an important concept, and that is this. That in the 12 steps, you go through a process after realizing that there's a power greater than yourself, and then you will turn your will and your life over to that power as you understand that power, and then you do an inventory. And in that inventory of your life, you take what's called a very powerful flashlight, and you go and you look at every nook and corner and cranny, and you find all those things that were good and bad in your life, and you document those things. And then in step 5, what you do is you go and you share that with someone after you've examined all of those dark corners of your life. Now, keep that parallel that I'm talking about doing that with us as a nation, and we know that. We know the good, the bad, the ugly, and we especially know the ugly, okay? And we pull that out, and we share that with someone, and we find out why did we do these things, and where can we learn from them? How can we change these things? And you pull all of that out with the help of people, and that's very smart people in this country when I'm talking about the nation, just pulling out all of the bad things that have happened and examining them. And then in step 6 and 7, we identify all these defects of character, as it's known, or defects of the actions of the nation. And then in step 7, we humbly ask God to remove those defects. And we do those types of things, okay? And we recognize them, and we ask God to remove all of that from us. Now, you can debate whether as a nation we have or we haven't done that. I would argue that we have. There's nothing else that we can do. You might argue that reparations and giving people financial restitution for things that had happened to them. But, there's the counter argument from there that, why would you take from people who did not own slaves to give to people who were not slaves? There's a point where we just have to put that at rest. And I think that that's the next part of where I'm driving with this is, if you're an addict, you don't ever forget your past. And we don't want you to forget your past. Because if you ever get to the point where you think having a drink or a drug is a good idea, then if I'm working with you, I always point back to your past and say, well, remember that? Look at what happened over there. And you remember what happened the last time, right? That didn't end so well, and it's not going to change. You do know that addiction is a progressive disease, and it gets worse over a period of time, never better. Look back there and replay that tape. That didn't work out so well, and it's probably not going to work out again. So we want to remember that, okay? But we don't want to dwell on it. The way that I tell people about this, describe it, is this. When you're driving a car, think about this. You look through the windshield, do you not? And the windshield is big. You can see everything out in front of you. And why do you want to do that? Because you want to look out to the front and make sure you're not hitting things. You're moving forward. We are always moving forward. You as a person are moving forward. We as a nation are moving forward. Now, we do look at the rearview mirror and look at what's behind us, maybe even the side mirrors, but we don't stare at the rearview mirror. We just glance at the rearview mirror. And that's an important analogy because in your life, you want to be reminded of your past so you don't make those mistakes, but you want to focus on moving forward and making sure that you're paying attention to what is coming ahead of you, okay? And not worrying or dwelling upon the future because we actually don't know if we're going to be alive tomorrow, right? And we have to live in today. I mean, think about that. Not one of us knows whether we are even going to be alive or dead at 8 o'clock tomorrow night. I mean, if you think about it, you don't know that. You don't know the date and time that you're going to pass away. So you don't want to dwell upon that, but you also don't want to dwell upon the past because you cannot do anything about it. How many of you, raise your hand, because I can see you, because I'm Mark Vines, raise your hand and tell me if any amount of worrying or anything that you say or do can change something that you did last year, last week, or last month, or even an hour ago, or even a minute ago. Right. You can't change it. It is what it is. So we want to focus on moving forward and improving things where we can, knowing that even in that regard, we are imperfect. And when we are imperfect in those areas and we do things that hurt people or harm people, it was not our intent, hopefully, but if we do, then we make direct amends to those people whenever we can. That's called, that's step 10 of AA, and that is what's known as a maintenance step, is meaning you make those direct amends when you make those flaws, or you do something to harm someone else. You make that amend immediately. You do it, but understanding that we are flawed people, inherently flawed. All of us are. But we will correct those when we can. But it is really doing a disservice to all of us to continually dwell upon the past. So when it comes to taking down monuments and burning these things and getting rid of our history, we don't want to do that because we want to be reminded of our past so we don't make the same mistakes of the future. So if you're down and you have your kids and you're walking around, say, Richmond or downtown in Alexandria, Virginia here, there's Confederate monuments, and your kid says, well, who is that? You say, well, Robert E. Lee. Well, who is Robert E. Lee? Well, then there's your teaching moment. Who's Jeb Stuart? Who is this? Who is that? Who was Ulysses S. Grant? Who is Abraham Lincoln? We want to be able to have those discussions. And you can explain who Robert E. Lee was, what the country was like at the time. Why did he become the general of the Army of Northern Virginia after Abraham Lincoln had offered him command of the Union forces? Why would he do that? Why did he have a loyalty to Virginia as opposed to the United States? Because that's part of our history. People identified at that time as being members of a state. They back in those days, you would have identified more as a Virginian than an American. But a lot of people who don't know their history don't know that. And that's a teaching moment for your children. And we don't want to forget those things. After all, if you go to Eastern Europe, for example, I've been to Poland before. Do you know what they have in Poland? If you ever go to Poland, do you know what they have there? They have the death camps. They have Auschwitz. They have Birkenau. They have all of these different camps, and they have not destroyed those. You can visit those sites today. Do you know why? Because the Jewish motto is this: never again and never forget. Never again and never forget. They want those monuments there. They want those death camps there. So for generations to come, people will never forget what happened. Slavery was a tarnish on American history, and we don't ever want to forget that. And we don't want to erase our history because we may forget that someday, and we may have problems down the road. And we absolutely do not want that. So in the promises, what's known as the promises in Alcoholics Anonymous is this: after you work through a program and you begin this or get close to completion of this spiritual development, and I shouldn't say completion because it's a constant journey, the big book says this. It says this, and these are known as the promises of your life. If we are painstaking about this phase of our development, we will be amazed before we are halfway through. We are going to know a new freedom and a new happiness. We will not regret the past nor wish to shut the door on it. We will comprehend the word serenity, and we will know peace. No matter how far down the scale we have gone, we will see how our experience can benefit others. That feeling of uselessness and self-pity will disappear. We will lose interest in selfish things and gain interest in our fellows. Self-seeking will slip away. Our whole attitude and outlook upon life will change. Fear of people and of economic insecurity will leave us. We will intuitively know how to handle situations which used to baffle us. We will suddenly realize that God is doing for us what we could not do for ourselves. So, folks, I'm going to leave you with that. That is, that we can get better as a nation. We will get better as a nation. But we need to stop dwelling upon the past and move forward as a nation. We've gone 155 years since the end of the Civil War without destroying everything in sight, and there is absolutely no need to tear everything down today. Look at monuments as a reminder that points to the past, but keep looking through that windscreen. Keep looking through that windshield and drive forward. Focus on what is coming at you, not what behind you. You know, our enemies, and this nation has enemies, is sitting back and looking at us destroy ourselves. Abraham Lincoln used to warn us that that was the biggest fear he had, and that was that if anything was going to destroy this nation, it was going to come from within. It was not going to come from without. So with that, folks, this is Mark Vines. You are listening to the Mark Vines Show. Please give me a rating, a good one. If you're going to give me a bad rating, please don't give me a rating at all. And visit the Mark Vines Facebook page, and we look forward to talking again soon. I have enjoyed this conversation, and I hope that you will come back and listen for some more. Bye.